My name is Norm Volsky, your host, and this is the Digital Health Heavyweights podcast.
Thanks, Norm. It's an honor to be here, and it's been fun to work with you over the years.
Hello, and welcome to the Digital Health Heavyweights podcast with your host, Norm Volsky. And today we are joined by Cheryl Cheng. Cheryl, welcome to the Digital Health Heavyweights podcast.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So you're the second member of the Veev Collective that's been on this podcast. So second time, group joining, which is great. First time for everything. And for all of our listeners and viewers that don't know Cheryl, today we're thrilled to be joined by her. Cheryl is founder and CEO of the Veev Collective and former general partner at Blue Run Ventures. She brings a unique blend of finance, marketing, and operational expertise. With a focus on digital health and wellness, she has led rounds and collaborated closely with innovative companies, including Hello Heart, Genev, Blue Fever, and others. Her extensive portfolio spans sectors, including technology and healthcare, with notable contributions to companies such as Human API, Waze, Cabbage, and many others. Cheryl's commitment to improving healthcare began 15 years ago, shaping initiatives at the Clorox Company. As an advisor of Stanford's biodesign program and a board member at Ronald McDonald House at Stanford, she continues to mentor and contribute in impactful endeavors. Cheryl went to Stanford and has an MBA from Kellogg, where she was a Forte Foundation scholar. We are excited to learn about Cheryl and all that her and her team is doing at Veev. So Cheryl, welcome to the show. And, wanted to, really understand, what inspired you to get into, venture from, starting at Clorox and, doing some other things previously.
Yeah, so Clorox was actually my break from venture.
Okay.
As you mentioned, I went to Stanford for undergrad, and it's difficult to get in and out of Stanford without drinking the Kool-Aid that we are in Silicon Valley, and tech sort of runs our little world here. And venture is a big part of that. But for me, I started my career in investment banking. And during the first internet boom and bust, my investment bank bought a small venture capital firm based in London, and I was asked to join that team. At that time, we were not looking at healthcare opportunities at all. I was focused actually on analog mixed signal semiconductors and enterprise software. So got a chance to see how venture deals were done. And there were a lot of things I liked and didn't like about it. But when I went to business school, I decided I loved at the core innovation. And that's what brought me to Clorox. And, I did a little departure from venture for a few years when I was at Clorox doing new products, and then came back to it.
Love that. Walk us through your experience at Blue Run. What were some of your greatest learnings?
Blue Run was an amazing experience for me. One of the things the first time, so I think of Blue Run as my second tour of duty in venture. My first one was as an associate analyst, really in one of the most difficult times, quite frankly, to do venture. And this might be the second most difficult time, the era that we're in right now. But when I was at Blue Run, I had the opportunity to learn the business of venture. And I think that's very important for investors who are just sort of coming into being a VC, because we often think of the thrill of the deal. How do we get really smart in a space, maybe become a quote unquote thought leader in it, hunt for these founders and these deals, do them, and then that's sort of the end of it. But the business of venture is so much more complicated, right? This is a somewhat of a cottage industry, managing a team, investors, fundraising cycles, portfolio construction. All of those things are sort of the business of VC. And at Blue Run, I had an opportunity to do that. So I actually started on the operations side, took a lot of my marketing expertise, applied them across the portfolio companies that we had. I also had done mergers and acquisitions before business school, so helped some of our companies think through those opportunities when they came out. And then eventually came into developing an investment thesis for myself. Mine was around digital health, and we can talk
Mhm.
more, I'm sure we will, around healthcare in a minute. But when I came into becoming an investor at Blue Run, I had spent a number of years understanding how Blue Run was going to be positioned in the market vis-a-vis other firms in the eyes of LPs. I had helped our managing partners fundraise a number of funds, led one fundraise myself. And so understanding that business of VC was such a foundational part of my experience there.
So, before you really started focusing on healthcare, you and your firm made some fantastic investments outside of healthcare. Personally, I've used Waze, for many years. Love it. That was
Yeah,
obviously a very successful exit. And then Human API, Cabbage, a couple other really, really successful
yeah,
companies,
yeah,
nice exits as
yeah,
well. Walk us through like learnings from working with those companies that scaled and scaled quickly and just did a great job of,
yeah,
launching commercially. What lessons did you learn from those successes that you think has made you even, more equipped to, really do
yeah.
well in this digital health space?
Yeah, so I really can't take credit for identifying those opportunities, Ways, Cabbage, my partners, John and Jonathan at Blue Run really deserve all the credit for that. But I did learn a lot watching them and the founders navigate those businesses. And all of those businesses were predicated around a thesis of data, actually. And, how could data be used in what we thought was a new era of compute? So with Waze, that was a smartphone, right?
Yeah.
And having GPS sensors everywhere. And what would people be willing to do in order to be able to get real time data about where they were going? And so it wasn't, you and I drive to work every day, and like we don't need instructions on how to get there. The
No.
value is knowing there's an accident like 1 mile down the road, and like how can we avoid that accident.
Or there's the
So
policeman,
that
checking speeds and
and
not to go above
right, and the speed
75.
trap, yeah.
Yeah. That's my
Exactly,
favorite
everyone tells
functionality
me.
of the app.
Yes, all my friends tell me whenever they turn off Waze, they get a ticket, and when they turn it on, that's how they avoid it. So yes, there's a lot of value there. Um, so for me, it was learning a couple things in both of those platforms. One of them was whenever you have a compute platform dislocation, so moving from desktop, laptop to mobile phone, it becomes an opportunity for developers to rush into the space and find new applications and use cases. So that's how it was with Waze. Same thing with Cabbage, right? Like, how did we used to underwrite small business loans? We would go to a bank, apply for a small business loan. It was on paper. It would take 3 months. And here, Cabbage found a way to pull data from your Yelp reviews, your Etsy reviews, all of this stuff that
Mhm.
was out there, collate that, build new algorithms to calculate risk. And that's what it was. And then they would extend a loan to a small business, and it became some of the working capital that these small businesses needed.
Mhm.
So those things are super interesting that are industry specific. What I really learned from the founders is that there is no linear path to success.
Mhm.
And all of these businesses, and even the ones that we were not a part of, I bet if you talk to those founders and the investors, there were dark days, very, very dark days where you actually felt like it could be an existential threat on whether your product or service was even going to continue to exist. And the fortitude and the resilience that these founders and teams had is extremely admirable and pretty unique, right? I think it takes a pretty special person to say, this is going to be my life's work to go start a company. So I really admire that.
So all those movies, that have like the parts or the shows where like the company's about to go out of business and they're on their last, $10,000, like that actually happens in real life. That's not just for Hollywood.
It happens. I mean, it doesn't happen in that 2-hour time frame, but yes, I mean, it does happen. And I think being a founder and a CEO, it's a heavy and lonely journey in many ways, that as much as your investor tries to relate to you and help you, you're really kind of, it's all on your shoulders. And by the way, the other thing is, you look at Waze, you look at Cabbage, you look at Uber, you look at any of these companies. By the time Hollywood gets their hands on it, it makes it feel like it was an overnight success, right? Like
Yeah.
by the time it's written about in the press, but really it's an overnight success that took 8 years in the making.
Yeah.
So that's a long time, right? It's a long time of eating ramen noodles and, being in some little startup office into the wee hours of the night. So, yeah, I think a lot of times we don't appreciate that in hindsight when we look at the successes and failures in tech.
That's great context because again, like the people who are founding these companies, they could have gone the safe route. They could have taken corporate
Of course.
jobs, and, done, very well for themselves, but they chose to, really follow a passion, and have a lot of conviction in starting their own thing. And they're making big sacrifices in the years prior to success. And I think that
Yeah.
is, a time where a lot of people question, them. I'm sure family, friends, like, hey, is
Yeah.
it worth doing this? How
I'm
many
sure.
times do you have to, stub your toe before you learn, type of thing. I think, all companies that have been successful, they all have different stories. Almost none of them are the
Hmm.
same. They're all very different.
Hmm.
The one thing they all have in common is their founders never gave up. That's the one thing every company will have in common is, despite the tough times, they just powered through and they didn't, take no, for an answer. Um, when someone said, hey, like, I don't think this is going to go anywhere. So I think that's really, really
Yeah.
helpful context. And I hope all of our founders watching this, if you ever have that tough night, don't give up. Success could be right around the corner. So you mentioned, that you eventually, did gravitate towards, healthcare. One of the healthcare companies that I think is probably most relevant to this audience that you worked with, I believe, at Blue Run, was you guys made an investment in Hello Heart. What was it about Hello Heart that, had you and your partners excited to work with them, and walk us through that experience and vetting process?
Yeah. So we met Mayon when she was raising a seed round. It was called Hello Doctor at the time.
Mhm.
And we declined the investment. And at the time, the business was very different than what it is today. She was,
Yep.
allowing people to take photos of their medical records and upload them. And her founding story is grounded in a very, very deep personal experience for her.
Yeah.
And we loved everything about her. We did not love the business. And so we said no to the seed round. And I offered to always be a resource. We often do. It's part of my ethos as an investor that you find founders who really, really want to build a great business. And even though you don't love the business, you could love the founder. And
Hmm.
that's what happened to me. So over I think it was probably year and a half, 2 years from when she raised her seed funding to the Series A, she would come and sit down with me and our team at Blue Run every now and then. And her business was evolving, and she chose hypertension as the area that she would focus on instead of being more broadly across all chronic conditions. And we saw her just really start to focus the product. And she is an incredible operator and
Hmm.
CEO. And just as her business matured and got those key KPIs that like she wanted to hang the business on, we
Hmm.
saw that kind of come to life. So when it was time for her to raise the Series A, I was like, I want to work with you. I like where the business has gone now. Um, so I think we met a couple days before Thanksgiving, and like over Thanksgiving break, we unfortunately blew up everyone's break to
Oh,
hammer out a deal. And that's it was a great experience for me, right? It was one of the first digital health deals that I led, and in a founder that I had had a chance to get to know over a period of time. And I was really grateful that even though we passed on the deal initially, and Blue Run absolutely can do seed investments and Series A investments. So it wasn't like, oh, you're too early, our fund doesn't do these things. It was like, no, we do, but we're not going to invest in your business right now. I genuinely meant it when I said, please use us as a resource. I, tried to make efforts to introduce her to partners and customers. And we built a relationship from that point, so that when the Series A came along, it was an easy decision. And I'm so incredibly proud of what that company has been able to do, the lives that they've been able to save, and the culture that they've built as a company. It's been, as you know, there have been some really good times and really bad times over the last 6 or 7 years, where everything was up and to the right and then it wasn't. And, a good part of the Hello Heart team is also based in Israel. So the last several months have also been pretty disruptive for them, unfortunately, like personally. But the company still maintains their focus. So I couldn't be prouder to say I was a part of that story.
That is a great lesson, for a lot of people to learn. Like, just because something's not a fit today doesn't mean it couldn't be in the future. And I think what I've noticed about the best investors I know is they just build great, long-standing relationships, and they have like a very good karma vibe where they like just do the right thing, and then that's part of their recipe for success. So I really like that, and I know a lot of investors that have their anti-portfolio. I'm sure it would have been a little nicer to get in at seed, but I'm sure it was still a fantastic investment at Series A.
Yeah. No, look, when the companies do well, it makes a difference, but in the whole scheme of things, it doesn't. And again,
Yeah.
this portfolio construction, portfolio management, as an investor is really important. So you do have to pick the right time for your firm to get into a deal.
Yeah. And I think on like Mayon's part, and it's a great lesson CEOs can learn, is like, just because an investor doesn't, invest in your most recent round doesn't mean they're not going to do it in the next one. Like,
Yeah,
timing,
absolutely.
always changes things. So I think it's just keep an open mind. You never know who's going to be a great partner in the future. And if you treat everyone with respect and, try to help them, then you're able to, do work with folks, that maybe you've turned down in the past. So I think it's a really, really, good way to live. What are other investments you're proud of from your time at Blue Run?
So I'm actually very proud of my investment in Genève.
Okay.
And so Genève now is part of United Women's Group. However, when we did that deal, I think I was probably one of the first institutional checks to invest in menopause and women's
Yeah.
health. So Genève was very early. Jill Angelo is a pioneer in thinking about women's health, menopause. And I think the context is really important, right? Like today, we're sitting in 2024, companies are getting funded in women's health all the time. You go back 5 years and it was like crickets, right? Like there was like nothing. And I just remember like, our investment committee meeting being like, hey, like, you have to justify, like, is this a big TAM? Is this a big TAM, Sam? And I just remember having to say like, well, half the population is women, and every woman is going to go through menopause, right? Like, and, it was sort of, I couldn't even believe, like, like we had to say these words, but like we had to say these words in order to convince like the group that there was an opportunity here. And then what I found was making that investment in kind of putting a stake in the ground to say, like, there's a market here. We're going to figure out business models, solutions, all of that. It really can help catalyze an entire space. Now, you think of a space, any space, you could be like, am I a couple years too early to a space? And I probably was, quite frankly, like a few years too early to the space. But I'm still really proud that we did that deal and that we were able to back another female entrepreneur who had an insight that probably a lot of other founders wouldn't have had. And just to start the conversation in the investment community, in the health ecosystem, that like menopause is, while it's not a chronic disease, right? Like
Mhm.
hypertension or diabetes and all of those things, there maybe even needs to be policy change, right? And we need to think about all the things that are attached to this time in a woman's life, including heart health and, weight and, brain fog and all of those other things. And there are real ramifications if you don't care for people holistically. So I think it was a good conversation starter. We wrote a $4 million check at the time. Genève was raising a $2.5 million seed round.
Mhm.
And I know like nowadays people would be like, I don't even know what we would do with a $2.5 million seed round. But at the time, that was like a standard seed round, right? And
Yeah.
I remember looking at her operating plan and thinking about the market size and just telling her, like, I just don't think that's enough money.
Mhm.
I think you're going to need more. And we ended up writing a $4 million check into the business, which was a much larger seed round. Um, but I don't regret that at all, right? Like, I think you have to think about giving some of these companies the appropriate amount of juice to go the distance and kind of crack open what was a new market.
Yeah. Really, really great, story there. Any experiences at Blue Run that you learned from of like some of the investments that didn't go well? I think like in early stage VC, if you hit 1 out of 10, you're doing pretty good. If you're doing
Oh, you're
two
doing
out of
great.
10, you're
Yeah.
like a rock star.
Yeah.
What did you learn from some of the ones that, didn't ultimately pan out, that has just helped you have a higher hit rate?
Um, well, so market timing is always one thing, right? And I think you're always you need to time the market both on entry into a deal and exit of a deal. And a lot of those things you have control over when you invest. You don't always have control over when you exit.
Mhm.
So there is that. At the end of the day, it's all around leadership, right?
Yeah.
In venture, especially in early stage, you're betting on the team. You're betting on operators who can look around the corner and see where the company is going, the market is going, the team is going. And sometimes that combination of things just doesn't work out. And I think people have to remember that these probabilities for success are actually really small.
Yeah.
So my friend who heads Threshold, Emily Melton, I remember years and years ago, she and I were talking about, VC deals. And she was like, it's this like archipelago of like terrible probabilities, right? The
Mhm.
probability that you hit the market at the right time, the probability that you built the right product for it, the probability that you hired the right team, you got the right investors, like, and each one has probably a less than 10% probability. And if you
Yep.
multiply 10% probabilities by each other, it's not high, right? So like you're
Yeah.
always facing down like the odds that you're probably going to fail over the ones that you're going to succeed. And I think what I learned is that any one of those variables could be the one that
Mhm.
is the death knell for a company. And it's hard to predict which one it is. Like, we would do our annual meetings all the time and, we'd have, what we'd say one year to the next year could change. And there's no crystal ball. Like you couldn't have predicted it. I think the biggest thing was I learned at Blue Run to be a really hands-on investor,
Mhm.
to really build a relationship of trust with our founders so that there were no surprises, right? When there were problems, we saw them coming together and we would try to address them together. And that was something that my senior partners at Blue Run really, really drove into me as I was becoming an investor. And, they modeled that behavior with their founders. And I try to carry that into, my ethos with my team here at Veev.
Yeah, I don't want to put words in your mouth because again, I'm just like interpreting, but it sounds like compassion and empathy is like really important as an investor. And you don't want to be the source of stress. You really want to be like the person to go to when they, have issues.
I mean, yes, but I am a source of stress. I have to be, right?
Yeah,
And I also, you have to walk both sides, right? Like you have to
yeah,
be compassionate and understanding, but at the same time, we do this job and we have a fiduciary obligation, right? Like as a board member, I have a fiduciary obligation to stockholders. As an investor, I have a fiduciary obligation to my investors. And
hmm,
so I cannot lose sight of that, right? Like I can't be your friend, and only your friend. That's not going to work either. That doesn't make me actually a good investor for you.
yeah,
So I have had, and every investor has had, very difficult, very contentious conversations with our CEOs and founders, right?
hmm,
Sometimes we're wrong, sometimes we're right. And however, in those difficult conversations, if you do not have a foundation of trust, um, things can go very badly.
hmm,
And that's what I mean, right? Like I'm not saying you should think of your investor as your best friend. No.
yeah,
That's not the point. But you should feel deep down that your investor wants the best for you and that they will do the right thing
hmm.
for the business. So if you don't have that, then that will make the tough times even more precarious.
It's great advice. What inspired you to found the Vive Collective? Walk us through nearly, 3 years scaling, the
Yeah.
organization.
Yeah. So as you know, through Genève and Hello Heart and, some of the other portfolio companies we had at Blue Run, I do really love healthcare. There are so many both financial uh, as well as personal elements to healthcare that touch everybody.
Hmm,
And so for me, what I found when I was at Blue Run was healthcare is difficult and you need kind of an entire team to be thinking about it. And it's not rocket science in the sense
hmm,
that, if you just got the smartest engineers in a room, like, you're going to solve healthcare. So it's not that. There's a lot of go to market risk. There's a lot of nuance in healthcare. And so for me, I really wanted to have a team that did nothing but think about healthcare.
hmm,
Um, and I while I really, really respected the generalist view of like Blue Run and a lot of different firms, specifically in healthcare, I felt like it would be difficult to do if we didn't have a dedicated team.
hmm,
So that's what sort of brought me to starting Veev was the ability to pull together a team. All we do is look at not just healthcare, but specifically digital health and health tech. So we don't look at life sciences or medical devices. I think that's another specialty unto itself. So that was a lot of my desire to do that was really about building a team.
Yeah. And I think you've already walked us through like why being hands-on and being a value-added investor, not only behooves you, but also behooves, your portfolio companies. I'm a big fan of niche expertise. Like when people ask, like, oh, you're a recruiter, like, what do you specialize in? And I specifically will walk them through. I'm like, well, I'm a healthcare recruiter, but we specifically focus on working with companies that sell to a combination of employers and health plans. And that's all we do. Like, is work with
Yes,
companies that sell to those types. And then we help them, with multiple types of
right.
positions within them. And they're like, wow, that's specific. I'm like, I need to be. Otherwise, like, I'm not
Yeah,
all that
yeah,
effective. I'm not all that valuable to prospective clients. So I see a lot of overlap, between that. So that, makes a ton of sense to me. Walk us through like starting an investment platform and building it from scratch, and what you've been able to accomplish in 3 years.
It's so hard. Full stop. I've never worked this hard in my entire life
Yeah.
as like starting something on my own. So this adds to my like empathy for founders. Uh, so we started in probably like the worst time, right? Like
Yeah.
mid 2020, when people weren't even sure if we were going to be able to ever leave our houses again. And so, um, timing wasn't great. I don't know that I would recommend that to anyone who's trying to start something new, to pick like the throes of a global pandemic. Um,
Did you start it
but
just prior?
no, no.
Okay.
Like, I mean,
So
it
made the
was
leap
like
once
really,
pandemic
really
was
kind of
already in, right?
unfortunate. No, it was, again, going back to the business adventure, I think when you're a general partner at a firm, like you have to think about when you sign up for another fund, you're signing up for another like 9 to 10 years. And so,
Yep.
we were just sort of at the tail end at Blue Run of wrapping up fund six, like, starting to think about the next fund. And so it was kind of a natural point if I was going to leave to start something new. Once you go out and like raise another fund, like well, I feel you have a financial moral obligation to your investors to like see that fund through. So
Yep.
that was just happened to be the timing. Independently, then, the pandemic starts in like March. And so
Mhm.
it just was this perfect storm. So it was not by design, it just happened to be that way. And then, building a team is really, really important. Like, as all founders know, like whether you're
Mhm.
building an operating company or you're building a investment platform, finding the right team is very important. And for me, what was important was finding people who had uh, medical and operating experience
Mhm.
that had also seen and scaled businesses. Because again, my time at Clorox and working in an operating role was so important. You understand the nuances of cross-functional leadership. You learn how to scale products from like never even existing to being on like, in like 1 out of 3 households in like a year.
Mhm.
Like that's your KPI, right? Is like get it in 1 out of 3 households. And you're like, oh my God, how do I do that? And like,
Yeah.
Rebecca, who you've talked to, she's been through it from like Validic to Livongo and Teladoc. And so having that understanding to know which levers you can push and pull, I think becomes very important. So I was really looking at ways to build that expertise in the team. And I think of our team as our team's not very big. In
Yeah.
total, there's only 5 of us. But all of us come from a different background, bring a different lens, all within healthcare and operations, even down to like recruiting and marketing that we want to be able to support our companies in. And so I think of it as a team, we're a Swiss Army knife that, founders can leverage for different things. And we don't take any individual ownership over any of our companies.
Mhm.
We are not incentivized to do that. And we really work on all of the companies together so that the founders can get the most out of us collectively.
That's
So
great.
those were important to me. Those were important aspects of building the platform.
That's a nice differentiator, that like when you get like our money, you're getting all of us. Like you're not just getting like one partner or one associate like on your account, so to speak. You got
Yeah.
like everyone's expertise, and everyone's open door, to be able to ask for advice. We love to hear about some investments at Veev. What are some that you're particularly really excited about?
Yeah. So small world. We met a company through a fellow investor that I know called Samacare. And
Mhm.
they were at the time raising a Series A. And it immediately sparked to me because I had done work when I was at Blue Run with Novartis. And Novartis had an innovation team. And I remember we would show all of these startups to them and say, like, what do you think of this one, that one? And one of the guys that I worked with, he always told me about the pain of getting onto biologics and specialty RX meds. And he was like, it's really painful. The average time to get onto one of these medications is like 6 to 9 months for a patient that's already been prescribed the medication, right?
Yeah.
And so it always stuck in my head that, like, you have these patients that are on these like severe chronic conditions that need an expensive drug. And when they finally get the diagnosis correct, and then they get the medication, they can't get on it for almost a year. And like, this just like blows my mind. And so when I met Samacare and Sham, what he was doing with prior authorization, benefits verification, and hub enrollment for specialty meds really resonated with me, because I remembered this conversation that I had with this executive at Novartis. And as I'm leafing through the investment deck, I see the guy's face on the deck as like an advisor. And I was like, so I call Anurag and I was like, hey, like, you and I have talked about this problem like 3 years ago, right? And I've always been looking for a company that was doing this. And he said, I know, I was always looking for a company that's been doing this. And it happens to be Samacare. And so he and I kind of picked up where we left off, talking about the opportunity set and where we go with this. And we ended up leading the Series A in Sama. But it's a super, super small world that I reconnected with Anurag over a deal that I happened to see that he didn't even bring to me, and I kind of busted him a little bit on that. But again, it was COVID, so everyone sort of lost touch. But for me, the reason why Samacare is so interesting for me as a case study is, I think as an investor, you develop these longitudinal theses around where you think there can be opportunity. And even 3 years ago, I was looking for companies in this space, and like, there just weren't any. And people just, there were consultants that were kind of duct taping solutions together for like a Genentech or an AstraZeneca or whoever, but there wasn't a universal platform. And so when you have these theses and you're studying a space over time, and then you finally find the one, you can really invest with a lot of conviction. So that's kind of how I like to come into deals, is we're studying a space, as niche as it may seem, although, specialty RX is really not that niche if you think about how much spend is going through it. But you're studying a space over what could be a period of time, meeting a lot of companies. And along the way, you're going to miss some good investments, but eventually you're going to pick the one that you think addresses all the pain points in the way that you have a lot of conviction around. And that's really a golden moment.
I'm going to ask you a very in the weeds question, and it's just because, like,
Okay.
I nerd out on this stuff. So here's a question. In terms of, okay, you want to get into a space. Do you tell all your investor friends, like, hey, if you find something in this, like, please bring it my way? Or are you like, hey, I don't want anyone to know I'm super interested in it, so they don't, like, just keep it for themselves, and maybe that gets them interested in looking, and it just, like, gets out that, like, hey, I think this is going to be a big market, and then, you might not get access to it.
That's a good question. My belief is that there are no real original ideas in this world. So I don't actually believe that my ideas are so incredibly original that nobody else has ever thought of them. It cannot be true. I just don't think I'm smart enough. Like, I just don't believe it, right? I also don't believe that there is any investor out there that has seen every possible deal out there. Like, it's not like you could have an army, you're still not covering.
You just don't have enough time
right?
in the day, even if you did.
No. So I actually believe in being a little bit more open with what I'm thinking about. And I also believe in getting into the deal is really only the very first step. And there's a lot of ways to do it. And my money is just as green as anybody else's, right? At the end of the day, people choose to work with us because they want to work with us. And when we have to compete for a deal, yeah, you can compete on price, but you're also competing on the fact that like, you're actually going to want me around the table for the next 4, 5, I don't know, 7 years, because you think I could be a good partner for you. And if you don't, then like, I don't deserve to win that deal. So I am okay with telling people the areas that I'm interested in. And, like
Yeah.
I tell people all the time, I really like pharma tech right now. Like I really
Mhm.
like, like I will tell people what we're spending time in, because also we're not a seed investor. We do later stage, like, we look for companies like 5 million in revenue or more. And so letting people know that I have been spending time understanding this space. If you were an investor in a company before me, like, you can trust me with your baby, right? Like I've done the work. I'm okay with that. Are there sharp elbows sometimes getting into deals? Yes, right?
Yeah.
Like, absolutely. And we've been on the receiving end of that sometimes, like, but it happens. I don't actually think that it's really difficult actually to know if I had been an investor in a deal, would the deal have ended up in the same place? Would the company have had the same outcome, good or bad?
Mhm.
Like maybe if I was the investor, the outcome would not have been bad, right? It could have been good. Or I could have driven what would have been a rocket ship like into the ground because I was the wrong investor. So I, I don't I don't know, maybe that's like naive of me, but I'm not as territorial about those things because I sort of believe that in the universe, like what should be will be. And then if we're diligent, like it will all work out.
Yeah.
So
I think that's very similar to like the scarcity abundance mindset. Like, it's
yeah,
better, in my opinion, to have the abundance mindset that there's plenty of everything out there for everyone. And like, it's
yeah,
not like there's only a little bit that has to be, just given or, taken by like a few amount of people. So I think, it's a good way to live and, be open, be pretty transparent, don't play
yeah,
games. Like, in
no,
most cases, you're gonna, be
yeah,
at the advantage. And again, like eventually at some point, like you might not be in an advantageous position by being, that way. But everything has opportunity cost. So, I think
absolutely.
you always have to
And
look at,
like,
you got to play the percentages, just like venture.
and we don't do only one deal, right? Like, I mean,
Yep.
if you've studied game theory, like, it's not like this is the last game, right? Like, if this is the last game, I might take a very different strategy, like,
Yeah.
but I know that it's not. And so we really want to work with a lot of other investors. And I genuinely believe that like getting the right minds around the table will be very accretive to all the different businesses. So while I may not be in a deal with you on this deal, the next company we might be. And so I do think of
Yeah.
it as a very collaborative with an edge of competitive aspect to it. But it's not a winner take all, I think, in any given deal. There's so many
Yeah, and that mindset
opportunities.
transcends industries. Like in my industry, when I
Yeah.
was getting trained in recruiting, there were some leaders of my firm that are telling me I would never tell a candidate on the first call who the company is. Can't trust them. What if they go around us?
Mm,
What if they go directly to the company? Like, you got to keep that because, all the bad that can happen. And I'm like, but what about all the advantages of sharing? Like, you're trying to build trust, you're trying to build a reputation, you're trying to build a brand. Like, our clients are great companies to work for. Like, by
yeah.
not sharing that information, we're hurting ourselves more than the occasional bad apple that, okay, that person has to hear about a great company, have an amazing experience with you, and then themselves decide, hey, I want to cut this person out of the process for my own benefit that doesn't really exist. I'm like, that's less logical than just being upfront and honest, and occasionally you'll get
Hmm.
burned. And I'm okay
Hmm.
with that. Like, that's a
Hmm.
risk I'm willing to take. I think there's just so many applications of that idea of transparency is better than like just, kind of sticking to yourself and, being really, um, a hog of information, so to speak.
Yeah.
So in terms of, investing in early stage companies, you mentioned the earlier you go, the more you're betting on the founder. What are
Mhm.
characteristics and traits you look for in a founder? Because again, many people are going to have different personalities and backgrounds, but like, what are the things that like most good founders have in common that you look for? And what are the things that most not great founders have in common that you look to avoid?
Um, so I think I've evolved my thinking on this over the years. I think when I
Mhm.
started, I was really looking for kind of this passion, right? Like people who would sit across the table and tell me, like, this is my life's work. Like, I won't do anything else except for this company. And I was really drawn to that. I think my thinking has changed now, and I really appreciate a level of maturity and practicality in founders.
Mhm.
And keep in mind, I really want to caveat this, for whoever is listening, we invest in healthcare, right? So if I were a consumer investor, I would think very differently. But we are
Yeah.
in a regulated healthcare industry. So I appreciate maturity. Um, and what I mean by that is not age, but it's like, the maturity to clinically and objectively think about all facets of the business and don't downplay the challenges because you have this passion for this space, right? Like you just have to
Mhm.
like tackle it head on. I also really appreciate decisiveness. I think that it's very easy to go into analysis paralysis and then therefore like waste time and don't move. And so it's like being able to go deep in your analysis, make a decision quickly, stick to that decision, rally your team around it. Like all of these things are very, very important. Um, because it's a dicey world out there, right? And it's
Mhm.
competitive. So you do that. And then I think lastly, and again, because we invest in slightly later stage companies that have
Mhm.
revenue, like just good operators, like people who have operating experience. Like I am valuing that more and more and more. And, especially in this environment right now, like we are probably in the most sluggish market since 2001. And everyone talks about like '07, '08, '09, but like if you think about it, tech rebounded like quick, right? Like I mean like all of the tech companies. This time I think it's going to be a much longer recovery, and I think that companies are going to need very, very strong operators.
Mhm.
So we talked about ways early on in
Yep.
this. One of the things I really admire about those founders was when they stepped aside and hired Noam as their CEO. So I don't know
Mhm.
if a lot of people know this, but Noam was not a founder of Waze. Um, and the founders are brilliant and humble and amazing human beings. And when they saw the opportunity that they needed to find a CEO who had experience scaling and building teams, they stepped aside.
Mhm.
And that is a difficult thing for founders to do, right? This is your baby.
Mhm.
How do I know that I'm handing this over to like the right person? But that level of maturity when the business needed it was something that they did. And I look for that, not that I want founders to step aside, but I look for that level of maturity in a
Yeah.
founder. And I think that your other question was what happens when
What do you look
like
to avoid? Like,
what are
what
the
are some
disaster,
things? Yeah, like
like the
what are some things
flags?
where you're like, hey, certain things I'm seeing some pattern recognition. If someone is this, it's really hard for them to like take this business to a commercial success because that always is a conflict
Mhm.
with growth.
Yeah, I think that, you know, when you meet founders who don't seem like they're going to be honest and upfront,
Mhm.
if they're, um, if they seem like they're just trying to manipulate situations for like the best, like short local outcome, local
Mhm.
maximus, I think that's problematic. I also, uh, I mean, integrity is just super important, right? And
Yeah.
so that's not something that you can just ask a question and be like, "Do you have integrity?" Like, who's going to tell you no, right? But
Yeah.
I think you just need to spend time with founders. But that sometimes that is a huge flag for me. Of course, it would be for everybody. And then the other, especially in healthcare, is do you actually understand like what it's going to take to build these businesses? And I think if the companies try to scale too quickly, like founders who don't know how to push back on investors and they're just like, yes, I will grow at all costs. And, like I will try to do everything, sell everything to everybody all at once. Like
Mhm.
that's not going to work. Right. And so I think founders who deeply understand their business and sometimes people who don't come from a healthcare background, we think we can just come in and like fix healthcare with like the wave of a wand. And
Mhm.
then people who have been in it for years are like, that's not happening. So I think we see some of that in our space where people come in guns blazing and it doesn't always work out. Not because they're not smart. It's just healthcare is a very unique beast, as you know.
Yep.
You recruit for these
Um,
roles, right? So you probably see that all the time.
yeah, all my listeners and viewers that come from the VC world, I think they would understand 100% what you mean by like, hey, like great operator. I think someone who maybe hasn't worked in VC would think like, what is an operator? Like, what is your definition of that? Like, is that just someone who was like VP of Ops or COO somewhere, and then he came in? I know that's not what you mean, so I wanted to just clarify.
Yeah.
Like, when you say, hey,
Um,
we look for great operators, like, what makes a great operator, and what traits do they have versus skills?
So the management team all have to be good operators in their function, right?
Yes.
So are you a if you are a head of sales, right? You need to know how to develop your pipeline, how to hire, how to fire, how to, like all of these different things in your domain, right? So like if
Yep.
the same thing for VP of Eng, head of product, most founders in early stage companies usually have a little bit more of a product bend.
Yep.
Um, or they are really, really good salespeople. It's kind of like one or the other is like
Yep.
a typical founder archetype. Um, and from there, they need to be able to build a team around them that has all the other functions that they may not have. And those people need to be good operators in their domain. And they need to know how to work together across functions. And this is where we see a lot of companies break down is that one function might be great, but like they can't engender the trust or cooperation of other functions. And so there's fighting. And if the CEO doesn't lay the ground rules for like, this is how we're going to operate, you're going to have inefficiency. You're going to waste money. You may never build a product or service that works because the integration behind the scenes is just not working. And so when I say operator, I don't necessarily mean COO, right? Like it's like
Yep.
every function needs to have high performing operators. And the CEO is the most important because all the functions sort of report up into him or her
Hmm.
for a while until you build that secondary layer.
Yeah.
Um, so that's really important. And then I think, and better than I do, so I actually would put the question to you is, hiring and firing at the right speed and knowing when to level up your team, when to, you know, when to add more, when to cut, those things are all really important.
Yep.
And that is both at the CEO level and then at all the other C-suite levels. So those are other aspects, I think, around growing a startup because the company that has 10 people is infinitely different than 100, than 1,000, than 10,000, right? And
Yeah.
so that requires very different leadership skills at every single stage. hopefully the CEO and the founding team can grow into that. Sometimes they can't or they don't want to. And that's when the board and the team need to call the number and say it's time to level up.
Yeah.
And doing it at the right time is very important.
My hypothesis, this is just one of my generalizations, sometimes based on facts, sometimes based on gut feeling, is I would argue most VC firms, especially in the tech hubs, tend to over-index on IQ and under-index on EQ. I think like ability to be emotionally intelligent is sometimes overlooked. And I think sometimes just like IQ, where did the person go to school? Like what's their pedigree? Sometimes can gloss over some like major constraints, with someone's personality or their skill set or, what traits they may have. So again,
Yep.
that's just like a general hypothesis. I have not met a successful founder that doesn't have a really, really, really high EQ. I've met some that have been really
Yep.
successful that might not have been Ivy League educated or maybe
Oh,
are capable of having
yeah.
gotten into one of those schools, even like if they had
Yeah.
tried their very hardest in high school or
Yeah.
whatever it may be.
Listen, I don't think that your education is a precursor for your success at all. I absolutely agree with you that EQ is important. I think that more tech companies die because of organizational issues than they do the code didn't work.
Yeah.
Like the code can be fixed, like all of that stuff. So I absolutely agree with you on the EQ piece.
Just one variable, one of many things that can go wrong, but that
There's
does
many, many things. Again, this archipelago of like all of these different issues, right? But yeah, organization, at the end of the day, all of these companies are made of people. And in this post-COVID world, like that's probably even more important, especially if you're not going to be in person all the time.
What advice would you give founders right now who are looking to raise money? It's a very difficult time, not only for, people running funds, but also, founders looking to get funding.
Yeah. Gosh, I feel bad for founders right now. It is a really, really tough time. So I'm going to break these comments up into two different groups of founders. So I think if you are a seed or Series A founder
Yeah.
right now, I would learn from your peers that came before you and build your company um, for strong unit economics as opposed to growth. And
Yep.
if you have funding now for the next 2 years, don't get distracted and just focus, right? And
Yep.
keep it lean and just do that. If you are a growth stage founder, you have probably gone through all the cuts and cost containment issues and all of that. And, as we call it, like right size the ship, right? So you're coming out of that. And I would say, one, take the time, start your fundraise processes early, really figure out what is the right investor for us at this time, right? Like, do I need domain expertise around the table? Do I need deep pockets? Do I need, like, what is it that I really need?
Yeah.
And be very deliberate about that when you go to market and give yourself time, right? Like there is going to be a lot of diligence that is being done in ways that founders will probably be surprised because they were like, why did this not happen to me in my last round?
Yeah.
The other thing is, uh, it's it. I'm hearing that founders are in a tough spot right now, also in terms of managing their existing board and investors. So a lot of times, I think in 2022 and into the first part of 2023, founders were holding firm on like valuation and saying like, no, I'm going to like kick that can down the road and I'll deal with it. And now I think they've realized those bridge rounds are up and like, I still want to build my business. Like, what do I do?
Yeah.
And they just want to be able to build their business, and they're willing to take, down rounds or flat rounds or whatever. But now they have to manage their board, and their investors may not want to do that. And this is where you might see a difference in what the founding team or the company is willing to do and what their investors are willing to do. So I think getting alignment with your board, your existing investors, on what are we willing to do is like very important. And figure out like what is the next business unlock that you need to achieve and raise for that unlock. So it's like if I can get to EBITDA positive, okay, shoot to raise that amount of money, right? Like don't like over raise, like whatever. And then right now you will see companies in some categories like AI, seem to be able to raise money super easily, right? And it's kind of, that's the hot, cool topic right now. And so it can be very demoralizing if you're not in that space. And there will always be celebrity founders who will always be able to raise money very easily. And that can be very frustrating. So I think founders should just try to shut out a lot of that noise in this market if they can. I know it's difficult, and just focus on their own business fundamentals, but I know that's easier said than done. So I know I say that, and then in reality, it's hard to do.
So for all of our venture capitalists that watch this and other people that curate companies and bird dog deals for VCs, what spaces are you interested in getting into? So people like myself and others can say, hey, Cheryl, like you should take a look at this. This kind of fits your investment thesis.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we like to look at companies that, generally have 5 million in revenue or more, gives us something that we can really underwrite. We do have a bias towards software oriented solutions. So either marketplaces or more enterprise SaaS type business models. So that's kind of the high level. I am spending, like I said, a lot of time in pharma tech. We think that there's a lot of opportunity to bring pharma closer to both the payer and the provider, and looking for solutions that help do that, right? So either through data or just collaboration, things like that. We are also looking at more back office oriented things. So it could be really boring, like supply chain, little bit more like health tech, fintech oriented stuff. And then in terms of indication areas, like, we're always interested in like the usual suspects, but one of the areas that I would love to do an investment in is oncology. I think that, one, like the numbers are only going up. I think of cancer as a chronic disease that, we're going to manage over time. And there's so much literature, there's so much science that's coming out that I actually think there's more data than clinicians can stay in front of. So I'm very interested in kind of next gen oncology models. But they're hard, right? They're really, really hard. And it's a tricky space, but I would always spend time looking in those areas for sure. So that's just like a few.
Yeah, those are great. I'll make 2 comments. I've been telling people for the last couple of years, until I'm blue in the face, I think until a vendor can help make sure people are taking the right drugs and they're not giving them side effects and symptoms, that is going to obviously deter medication adherence. I think it's going to be really hard to manage chronic disease consistently. So whoever can unlock that right mix, I think is going to be ultra successful.
Right.
The second thing I've noticed, in being in this market for a long time, is I'm shocked at the fact that there is not like a or multiple oncology vendors that have really sold successfully, consistently into the enterprise employer space. Like mind blowing as how big of a cost item it is, as big of an issue it is, for these large employers that are some of the biggest payers in the country. Just shocks me that like no one has broken through there yet. So can agree more with what you just said. I always like to ask people, I'll ask them a lot about the industry, but then I'm going to start asking them a little bit about themselves at the end. How do you
Oh
participate in
no.
wellness? I think a lot of people view VC as one of the most stressful jobs, time consuming. Very rarely do they have like the true work-life balance, that many corporate jobs have. So how do you balance like a very stressful, time-consuming job with also practicing what you preach and like having a wellness regimen of your own?
I'm terrible. I'm terrible. I'm just gonna flat out say like I am terrible, terrible. Um, I have so many competing priorities on my time all the time, and I really uh, tribute my team to try to get me to like work out on somewhat of a regular basis, but it is so painful for me. So I can't say that I love it, but I do feel that I am approaching an age where if I don't pay attention to it, like it's really going to start to catch up with me one day. So having said that, I do really want to spend more time on it. I actually, for me, wellness has been more on the mental emotional side, and I actually can't I can't meditate. Like my brain can't turn off. Like I've tried.
Yeah.
My idea of meditation, I just like fall asleep and then I'm like, I'm not really sure that that achieved what it was supposed to achieve. Um, but what I do have, and I really recommend people have, is I have a group of, they happen to be other female GPs in other venture firms, not in healthcare necessarily. We are all working moms. We are all in a similar stage in our career, in our life, and we get together regularly. It is such a stress release valve for me to have these women in my life. Not necessarily that like we're not even in the same areas of investments, right? So it's not even like we're comparing deals.
Yeah.
It's not like that. It's purely for emotional support, and it's everything, Norm. Like it's like we're all in a time where we're managing our health, our children's health. We are very rapidly dealing with our parents' health. Like we are in that sandwich,
Yeah.
and the cognitive load is unbelievable, right? Like the spreadsheets I have for like everything in my life is just like amazing. But having them is so valuable. And so, do I wish I could find time to run 3 miles a day? Yes. Will I even tell people that I'm even close to doing that? Not at all, right?
Mhm.
But I think that there's other elements for wellness, but I do think I had like a health thing earlier last year where I messed up something in my neck and I literally couldn't sit up for more than 15 minutes at a time. And I was like working, laying down on the sofa with like my laptop like inverted so that I could type. And it's not a great place to be, right? Like, I mean, like you definitely need to do more, but it is hard when you're doing 1,000 things at once. So what I tell people is do as I say, don't do as I do. People should focus on it. And I should do a better job myself.
Well, you're one of the catalysts of changing healthcare. You're helping a lot of people live healthier lives. Hopefully, you'll find some
I
balance
should do it.
sometime soon
I should do it
where you can do
too.
it for yourself. It would be a real shame if you helped all these other people, get in really good, health space so they can live longer, healthier lives, and you weren't able to do it yourself. So hopefully, we have inspired you a little bit to do that. And I would say it's really intriguing that you mentioned what you mentioned about like having a peer group, having a group of people that
Yes.
you can, kind of rely on. I watched the Netflix documentary Living to 100. It's like 5 or 6 episodes.
Mhm.
And again, I'm going to try to remember the statistic because, as you said, us humans, we're just getting more data, thrown at
Yeah.
us than ever before. I think it was said that if someone at an elderly age had a friend group, they're statistically going to live 4 years longer than if they are lonely.
Yes.
So I think that's just like
Yes.
amazing. Like as you grow and as you age, like continuing to find friends and have peer groups and have a
Yes.
community. It really is a huge determinant of longevity. So last thing I'll ask, you're always on the run. You've probably flown all over the country a bunch in the past years. You don't have much time to exercise. Any like healthy recipes you make really quickly at home that you recommend
Uh,
for the other people who are busy that might need some inspiration?
yeah, so I'm Chinese. So today's Lunar New Year. So happy
Okay.
Lunar New Year to everybody.
Here.
So we actually, while I do not have an opportunity to exercise as much as I would like, we do eat relatively healthy at home. We eat a lot of tofu, which I love tofu. And I actually
Look over
love
here.
I don't eat it like plain on a salad, but there are a number of Taiwanese recipes for tofu that we use, and I just think it's a great source of protein. It's lean, um, and so I would recommend if people are willing to invest in like a donabi clay pot and look up some, Asian recipes for tofu and figure out how to incorporate that into their diet as an additional form of protein aside from like red meat. I think that that might go a long way. But I actually really, really love your comment about community as people get older. It is definitely one of my hopes is to build a little commune, like a
Mhm.
physical commune for like me and my friends, just like small homes that like are in the same property. Where we can be together and like cook together and like, just hang out as we get older. So that is one of my goals. Um, when I downsize my
I
house and I
love it.
finally get the kids off to
Well,
college.
very, very exciting. Great thing to aspire to. I'm a big fan of tofu. I unfortunately have like a gastrointestinal chronic disease, and my gastroenterologist maybe like 5, 6 years ago. It's like, hey Norm, have you thought about like a vegan diet? I'm like, no, I have not. Now I'm like 90%, eating plant
Yeah,
based, and I have I think 5 blocks of tofu in my fridge as we speak. I buy it in bulk at Trader
yeah,
Joe's, the
same.
like hard
Yeah,
pressed one, super
yeah,
firm. That's the one to get. So it doesn't fall apart on you if you're gonna grill it or like stir fry it. I would love some
yeah.
recipes if you can send some over.
Okay. I will
Always
send
wanted
you,
to
I
try
will
good
send you
ones.
a couple.
And the
Yeah.
last thing I'll ask is your like community of women VCs. I have a couple of people that I think off the top of my head would be great additions. Is that like an invite only group, or is that like a hey, we're welcoming everyone type of thing?
Oh, it's very informal, right? Like it's not, I am happy. We just get together socially, and it's kind of whoever wants to get together. But I think over the years, we've integrated our families into it as well, right? Like our
Oh,
husbands know
nice.
each other, the kids know each other, and we travel together sometimes. So it's sort of become like almost like a little wolf pack.
Yeah.
Um, and just it just happened organically, but you know, you it's difficult because like just like founders need people to empathize with them, like you need people who are walking the walk that you're walking,
Yeah.
right? And you want to be able to say something, you want to be able to express a frustration or a joy, and the other person just innately understands
Yeah.
like what you're feeling, right? And that's kind of what we have in our group, and that's something special, and I think everybody should have that, because life is too short to like go through it alone, and sometimes you need those people.
Yeah,
So
it's tough when
I
you're
hope
at a
everyone has
success
that.
and you feel like bad because you're like it feels like a bragging to like someone who's not in your business. So it is really important to like work with other people, not work with them, but like have that sense of community with other people that you can, talk about
Yes,
failures and successes with and feel like you're not being judged, and that people are truly happy for you
100%.
and not jealous. So I have like peer groups in recruiting, that I can bounce ideas off of
Good.
and I can bounce off things. And it's been super helpful for me. So
Yeah.
that's great. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate the time. This is fantastic information for all of our viewers to listen to and to consider and incorporate in their own lives. And again, Cheryl, thank you for joining us on the Digital Health Heavyweights
Thank
podcast.
you.
And keep doing, the great work you and the Vive Collective are doing. It really is great to see. Thank you for joining. Please like, comment, and subscribe below if you enjoyed it.